Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, and welcome to the award-winning Power in Politics podcast, the conversation about the issues that are impacting you the most with the officials, the advocates, the members of the community that are making those decisions and calling for change, holding them accountable along the way at the same time. We're about a month away from the New York State legislative session, along with the reveal of the New York State budget. So tonight we're speaking with the New York State Budget Director, Blake Washington. He's part of the Hochul administration who right now is working on that budget. So we speak to him about the potential shortfalls when it comes to deficits and also some surprises when it comes to revenue, the impacts of the federal government potential cuts there, along with Zohran Mamdani and his policy proposals and their ripple effect across the state. Thanks as always for listening. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts at Power in Politics or watch on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. We're joined today by Blake Washington, New York State Budget Director. Blake, thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
In your office, thanks for having us and hosting here today. We appreciate it. As we sit here in the month of December, where are we in the budget? Where are you in this process? Let's start there.
Well, we're a little over halfway through the current fiscal year budget. So this time of year, we're sitting down with our staff here in the Division of Budget, hearing their budget recommendations for next year, but also just seeing place and time where we are in the current year, where the spending is, where the successes are, where the stress points are, and giving recommendations for a path forward. Sitting with all of them in the last couple of weeks, it's been really great, really gratifying. They've got a really smart and talented staff here, and that's what we've been doing, basically nonstop for the last couple of weeks.
So you had some updates over the course of the last year. Obviously, the budget and the state's finances are always evolving, right? We know that as the months and we see how things play out fiscally, not just in the state, but nationally as well. You did see, about around the mid-year, tax receipts have a bit of a different than you were originally projecting. Can you tell us exactly how things changed over the course of the year when it came to the state's finances?
Sure. So as viewers might know, our state fiscal year begins in April, it ends in March. So off year sort of relative to some of our peers. When we were constructing our budget last year with the legislature, when the budget was ultimately adopted, we were facing a real sort of change in our economics here in the nation, and nationwide economics. And that change related to some of the tariff policies coming out of Washington. And at that time, Liberation Day was announced. The stock market changed roughly by 20% in the downward direction, a correction territory. And in the state of New York, we're very much dependent upon the stock market for performance of revenues. Since then, some of those economic fundamentals have changed. Some of the tariff policies have smoothed out a bit. And as a result, our revenues have improved markedly. So in our mid-year report, we've changed our revenue estimates. We have a gap now that's not $7 billion, but $4 billion, and we're still chipping away at that as we go.
The gap has decreased.
That's correct.
How significant is that decrease? How does that impact things moving forward?
Well, it helps us to make a little more clear-eyed decision-making as we're coming into budget. It helps us to know that we're able to finance the current law programs that New Yorkers care about. It helps us to know that to recognize capacity to build upon many of the successes that the governor has championed in the last 4 years, and it just gives us the latitude in making those decisions without asking for tax increases and other things of that nature. It gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I was going to ask, to the regular person, they might hear budget deficit, budget gap. What's it actually mean to a person walking on the street? How does it impact them?
Well, sure. I mean, a gap is basically, is your spending matching your revenues? And when there's a misalignment, you have a gap. That's essentially layman's terms of where we're at. And when you have those gaps, in the state of New York, when we pass a budget in any given year, it has to be reconciled to zero. It has to be a balanced budget. So this governor looks at the tools on hand and she says, well, where are we spending hot? What do our revenues look like? How do we align them to get to that place? So ordinary New Yorkers, how they would experience it is, do we have enough resources on hand if we had a yawning deficit? Do we have enough to support the Medicaid program that millions upon millions of New Yorkers are dependent upon? Do we have enough resources to support our very generous school aid program, which 670 plus school districts rely upon? Those are the real world impacts of when you have a deficit, you can't do as much, and taxpayers come to rely upon those programs. And so we want to make sure that we move heaven and earth to make sure they're sustained.
Yeah, if someone looks at a pie graph, you could say at the budget, those are the two big ones, right? Medicaid, school aid on a yearly basis, foundation aid, that whole conversation. I'll get back to school aid in a second. I did want to ask you about that. But first, broadly, $252 million last year is what it ended up being, right?
Billion, yes.
Billion, sorry, excuse me, billion. I think you see some of the pushback from that come say, well, that's increased by $100 billion over the course of the last decade. Is that sustainable? Is that something you are trying to correct, especially with the federal government in mind and what they're doing?
Well, much of the increases are jointly financed with the state and the federal government. Our Medicaid program has led the pack in some of those expansions. And those expansions impact every community in the state of New York, and they're areas of investment that have improved health outcomes and have stabilized the health sector, both in urban centers and in rural areas. And so those are investments we see were absolutely critical. We've also financed, the school system, which we'll get to in a moment, I suppose, but providing a remedy for finally paying off foundation aid. This governor took it seriously. Governor Hochul said, "How do we provide the resources to the classroom throughout the state of New York so that we can make sure that there's adequate dollars in place to teach our children?" We've met the statutory, the legal obligation, and then some. So those are investments that were sort of bottled up for many, many years, and they were sort of, I would say, certainly also in mental hygiene spending is another area where we've spent, where this governor has prioritized spending. When you look at those items, mental hygiene, school aid, and Medicaid, yes, we have spent more, but we think that spending relates to what the need is out in New York.
Are we talking a similar ballpark in terms of this year, moving forward?
A similar ballpark. We'll see many of the same programs that we'll continue to finance. The governor for the last handful of years has been shouting from the rooftops that the costs of childcare are ones that are that are crushing families. How can we get ourselves on a path to finally meet some of that demand? It won't happen overnight. But even in her State of the State last year, the governor said, how do we get to universality? What does it take? Over what period of time? Those sort of decisions we're talking about now, some of the concepts we're talking about now. But generally speaking, the state budget as you know it today will be very similar to what it is in a couple of months from now, with growth reflecting natural cost escalation.
Just quickly on the school aid conversation, which really kind of came to a head 2 years ago when the governor had made her proposals that obviously received a lot of feedback, you could call it, and there were a few changes last year in the most recent budget. Are you looking at anything more when it comes to addressing how schools are funded in the state, knowing that that's a big chunk of what the budget is, and know that you're also trying to be more efficient in how the money's spent?
Yeah, we're always looking at the fundamentals of how we spend money on the state side, how we get resources back to our school districts. You identified last year, we just updated a couple of bad data points that were 10 plus years old that were providing for an equitable distribution of state dollars in all corners of the state. We remedied that. We'll continue to phase in some of those items as we move forward in this year's. So I don't know if there's going to be a wholesale change in the way that we route dollars to school districts, but we want to still. It's a priority to the governor that investment still maintains intact rather, and that we keep building.
How big right now are the potential federal budget cuts?
Well, I think the one item that I think, to begin, one of the biggest, most significant cuts was for our health sector. The governor took a bold action just a handful of months ago for the Essential Plan. We had some changes in eligibility for persons in the state of New York to access the Essential Plan, persons at 250% of the poverty level, and more. We have submitted some correspondence to CMS to secure as much of that health care as we can, knowing that that one federal change alone would cost the state about $3 billion annually. Those are the sort of I think that's the longest pole in the tent as it is today, the Medicaid program. And now some of those costs don't even come through the state of New York. Some of those costs also hurt New Yorkers when their insurance coverage, when their premiums for insurance coverage double and triple. Those are a problem for New Yorkers. So we have a state financial plan problem, but then we have a broader problem from some of the federal cuts that we don't have insight into. So we're watching those as they materialize.
We've heard the governor continue to say we can't backfill all of this, right? Are there all of it? Are there areas that you can make at least try to make up for it?
I mean, I can't commit to anything to that nature. The governor's correct. We cannot backfill. You know, the essential plan cuts alone would cost the state of New York $350 million per month. So that's not something we can do. But, you know, when the federal government shortchanges us, we have to step in. The governor took action just a month ago when SNAP was on the rocks, when the federal government wasn't adequately funding SNAP. The governor charged the Division of Budget to find some resources to help provision our food pantries throughout the state of New York. We came up with more than $65 million to do that. We moved things around to do that in real time. It was a real success. It was meeting a moment, but that was, you know, only $65 million. That's a crazy thing to say, but $65 million was manageable, and we met the moment. But you know, moving forward, when you have problems that are $200 and $300 and $400 million monthly, it's the state of New York cannot bear those kind of costs.
The other question about being able to be more efficient is, I remember the governor said, I think early last year, and then you've also put out to the agencies, where can you be more efficient in your spending? What kind of response have you received? Has that already been happening at any level?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the letter from myself to all the state agencies went out in October, and they've been submitting. The agencies have been submitting a whole host of ideas of how the state of New York can do business more efficiently, so that we don't have to use precious state tax dollars to fuel state agency spending. But then also coming up with ideas for how persons that interface with or interact with state government, how we can make their life a little bit easier too. We've been getting those as well, not just from state agencies. Importantly, we've been hearing from the business community and from SUNY, which is a state agency, but from other bigger entities that don't actually have touch to the state agency. They've been submitting stuff all the while as well. The insurance sector, another great example, health sector. It's been all hands on deck. It's been really a positive outcome.
What's the business community want?
Well, the business community has a lot of asks, and some of them are very, very difficult ones. And I've been in Albany for 20 years. They have a series of priorities that are inviolate to them, and have been really a challenge for policymakers to grapple with for well before Governor Hochul was governor. But they've asked for just regulatory relief. Why does it take as long as it does for things like SEQR, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act? Why does it take this long for permitting for major projects or for minor projects? That kind of stuff has been part and parcel to what they've recommended. The business community has been really great. They've looked by sector. They've said, here's some improvements that we think are good. We've shared that with our entire administration just to kick the tires on those and see what we can come up for.
Other entities obviously have taken a look at the state's budget from outside of this office, this building. And one thing that I was reading about that they pointed out was the corporate tax rate and the going to be decreased starting in January. Is that still the plan at this point?
Well, state law has it decreasing in January or at the end of our calendar year. Yeah. So, it's a discussion as we come into next year's budget. We have to, again, as we said earlier, we have to align revenues with expenditures, and to the extent that they don't meet at one, then we'll have to revisit the policy.
Yeah, I guess that comes under the idea of, Zohran Mamdani, New York City, you hear tax the rich all the time, and I think I had the conversation with the comptroller a few months ago, and he goes, well, they're already being taxed. The question is, do we do it more? In terms of raising revenue, now that obviously that tax rate decrease is a different conversation, but on the table are those kind of ways to raise revenue a part of the conversation right now for you?
So it's been in the public domain, and we're not going to kid ourselves here, but this governor, when Governor Hochul sees the state of revenue, she says to me, and just like any governor would say to any budget director, what do I have on hand? How are our current law resources performing? And how can we make investments that New Yorkers need now without contemplating taxes? And that's my job. New Yorkers should be relieved to know that Wall Street is doing very, very well right now. That gives us some latitude to make the investments that they care about. That won't last forever. It's very cyclical. We've seen that having been in this building for many, many years. It is cyclical, but when you start to entertain some of the tax increases that are in the public domain that people are calling for, you have to really weigh it against your economic competitiveness. Where are we in relation to our peers, our states that are adjacent to us in the Northeast? Where are we in relation to the nation? In the city of New York, the personal income tax is greater if you're a resident of the city of New York than anywhere else in the nation. The governor wants to maintain our tax competitiveness. She also wants to maintain every resident in the state of New York. She wants residents of all incomes to remain here, remain New Yorkers, keep their families here, grow their families here, invest here, and we'll move heaven and earth to keep that.
You know, in this conversation, obviously we talked about all sorts of different factors that impact this budget and maybe some of those other outside things that might keep pulling money away, potentially. Obviously, we talked about the federal government. Is there ever the potential for going to reserves? I know the governor has been very proud of in her tenure of building those back up again. Is this the situation where you could tap into that at all?
Well, the governor would be very loath to tap into reserves especially to finance recurrent spending. The governor was eager to tap into reserves last year to finance to make good to businesses in the state of New York for the unemployment debt. Sure. We had a one-time expenditure that was of no fault to employers, but it was a $7 billion debt paid for by businesses. The governor took $7 billion of reserves and paid off that debt so that businesses wouldn't be held to account to finance that. And instead, businesses are able to hire more or give wage increases. That was a very virtuous investment of one-time resources. Anything that would use these one-time resources for a recurring deficit would be would be last resort for Governor Hochul.
One last question, circling back quickly to New York City and Zohran Mamdani, because obviously he's had different proposals that are going to cost money, and I know that even some members have said, our work coming up here in January, we're going to try to implement that, and that means trying to find a way to pay for it. How much is that a part of the budget conversation at the state level? Because obviously the state is going to have to play a factor here.
Well, I think number one, as we were saying earlier, we want to make sure that we're investing appropriately in our Medicaid program, in our schools. Those are sort of the two long poles in the tent. We want to make sure that we're competitive among our peers. But the governor knows that there are investments that New Yorkers across the state of New York care about, one of those being childcare. So what can we do in the interim? Again, looking at current law resources, are we covering the bases on what we've already authorized? Do we have an overage to invest in the things that New Yorkers care about? That's sort of the area that I'm looking at on behalf of the governor. If we're going to make investments, whether it be in childcare or any other thing, what do we have on hand? What can we do today? How can we plant the seeds today so that we can grow and see results in out years? And that's the iterative process that we're in the middle of now. Just reflexively authorizing new taxes or advancing new taxes to the governor, it's certainly something I wouldn't do. It's not something she would expect of me. It's making the hard decisions first, looking what the resources are, and giving New Yorkers the confidence in knowing that there's people here in Albany that are looking out for their interests and trying to maintain the state of New York's competitive as sort of the primary goal.
Blake Washington, thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.